Good morning. It's just over a week since the kit arrived. Thanks to everyone who's been helping out with queries that I've posted on Facebook, and thanks for everyone who's been following along. It's been good fun so far, following along with the time lapse and also the Ustream account. What I thought would be quite good today was to give you a better idea of what we've actually been doing and give you some close-ups. So I'm going to go around with the camera now, and we're going to have a look at what's been going on the car. So let's start with the front suspension. It's what everyone starts with on a Caterham. The first piece that actually goes in is the steering rack. So this obviously won't be connected to start with, but it's easy to insert through the front of the car. You can see it tracking along through and out. Things to remember though, remember to put your IVA cover on before you get going. All that does is it eventually covers up down here, but if you forget it to start with, you're going to have a right pain later in the build. So don't forget this. Same on the other side. And then the next pieces are the lower and upper wishbones. Here's the lower wishbone. It is possible to get this upside down, so just be aware of that. You have to check at this end of the wishbone there is a ball joint in here, and you can tell which is the right way up, because there's one way you can see a circlip inserted. That is the one that points down, so make sure the circlip is pointed downwards on your lower wishbone. The bolts to go in are a bit of a nightmare. It's more because of the spacers you have to put in, and it's a bit of a fiddle trying to get everything lined up, because they're not heavy pieces, but they're not light if you're on your own. It's again better with it as a two-man job. And I don't know that I can see down anymore into the engine bay, but yeah, you can't really see the bolts at the bottom. They're just down here. Let's see if I can get my hand in. No, I can't reach around. But the bolts down there, again, it's a fiddle, but eventually it all goes together. It's the washers that cause the problem. Then the next bit after that is to get the dampers in. So here we go. The top bolt of actually I should mention the top wishbone, because although it's a similar idea, actually there's some intricacies, because as you can see, the headlight, which we're just starting to work on, actually goes, all the wiring goes through the headlight mount. And once it's on the car and you've got all the bolts done up, it's actually a pain in the ass trying to get all the wires through. So I might even recommend, when you're putting this mount on, to actually consider feeding all the wires through and doing that bit first. It makes it a bit unwieldy, but you'll only have to undo it later if you don't. There you go, so that's top wishbone. I think, again, everything's just, the access is awkward, so you can see how that bolt sort of sits in a really awkward place. Even from above you can see how it's covered and stuff. Okay, we've added some, maybe some wiring in there since. You can see how it's awkward. So it is a fiddle, but it does go. The top damper, you've got to remember to insert bushes. I can't remember the top one has it or the bottom one, or maybe even both, but they have aluminium bushes I think they go through, so you'll remember to insert them. But the bolts will come installed in the chassis, so you have to take them out. But again, this is probably the most tricky bolt of them all to actually fiddle in and out. Again, I don't know if I can get in here. No, I can't get in there. There's no room in the chassis basically, and there's a bit of a chassis mount just where the bolt wants to come out. Did find that a bit of levering on the bodywork to start pushing it home helped. Plus rotating it with, if you can get an Allen key to it eventually, or initially just some pliers or something, just to get some rotational torque on it, and eventually it pulls itself through. Yeah, look, we've got a big spider coming down. I'm glad I didn't walk through that. He's having fun there, isn't he? Once you've done that, you pretty much get onto the anti-roll bar. Now, the anti-roll bar attaches in here with a ball joint. He goes on the floor now. It attaches here with a ball joint, and it goes all the way around the front, through the mounting point, through the rubber grommet that you have to insert, and back into here. At the moment, it's actually undone. It's not in its mounting. It should sit further up the chassis. So there's the top bolt there. But it's out so that I can, because I had to take the head brackets off, so we're putting the lighting on. So, but eventually that will sit up here. So then you're onto the. Let's keep around this side. It's a bit brighter. Onto the uprights. Now my uprights didn't have the brake calipers attached, but you can do them after you've done everything else. So you can wait until you've got the uprights actually physically attached to the car. Okay, there's some technique in the uprights as well, which is useful to know. First of all, don't forget to attach the cycle wing stay. So this bit that has to go. That goes in the back here, and that nut around the back goes. There's a nut in here. And it's pretty difficult to actually tighten and torque that one. Don't forget, this is a steering part. So when you can't get access one way, just turn the steering, and you'll be able to then you can gain yourself access. Little tip there. It sounds obvious, but when I was doing it, I was getting all sorts of trouble, and then realised I could actually turn the wheel, and I could get more room. Once the bottom bit's in and tightened, we're then onto the top mounting. Now this is an interesting one. What happens is this actually gets pushed and squeezed into the top bracket. In order to do this, some people use, because this bolt that comes down here is actually on a ball joint, it's actually free to rotate in here. So when you're trying to tighten the bolt, it has a tendency to just want to rotate. So the technique is to use a separate bolt, which Caterham supply, which hasn't got the nylock in it, and then you use that to sort of squeeze and compress all this down together. It's a two-man job really, one person pushing down and the other person tightening this bolt. And once that's all fully squeezed and compressed into place, you then remove the original bolt, and then it should be tight enough, everything should be tight enough to then put the nylock in place. So that's the kind of technique there. And then once all that's in place and done, then it's a similar thing with the steering column. So you squeeze it into place. This time they don't supply you with the locking nut, but as long as you press down hard enough in, you'll find that it does eventually go. Brakes then. It was fairly obvious how the front ones went, to be honest. It sits over and bolts on at the top, and there's one underneath at the bottom as well. Inserting the brake pads was again pretty easy. You just have to make sure that when you're inserting them, don't lose the little R clips that hold everything in place. The bolts just pass through, making sure you pass them through the actual brake pad holder as well. And they just sit in there, that just sort of holds them back. Okay, so that's the front suspension. I actually went on to do my differential next. So the differential sits at the back of the car down here. You can see this big blob of a thing here. So this is the diff. The reason I'm holding this pin with a little thing, massive sort of tent peggy type thing, is because this is what I was lent for the purpose of fitting the diff. Because there's a bolt up here. Let's get my camera up there. There's a bolt up there, that's the top bolt, the dreaded top bolt. And you've got two on either side of these. This is the front bolt, the lower bolt. And the technique for getting the diff in is to, instead of putting the bolt through the top initially, you just shove a really long thin bit of metal like this, and you hang the diff. It's much easier to get the thin bit through, obviously, because the main problem with the diff is that the bolt holes at the top here just don't align properly. So once it's hanging there, you can actually then attach the front bolts and put the spacers in. You measure the distance to centralise to the outer roll bar mounting, which is out here. So that's the rear roll bar, anti-roll bar mounting point. Once that's all centralised, you can then concentrate back onto the top bolt again. And again, you need to spacer it all, so you need to sort of work out how many spacers you're going to need before you go, and then hope for the best that once you put everything in and tighten everything up, that the spacing and the distances are still within tolerance. Tips for this one: leave the pin in. So start from with the pin in place, the top pin. You can start manhandling the bolt through. Don't be afraid to use a lump hammer on it. Once it starts going, it will go, and again you can use some rotational torque to try and get it to grip through as well. Once you get to the right at the end here, these mounting points in here are actually in bushes. They're rubber bushes. So when you get to the end, you can see that you're out of alignment by a few mil. You can actually again use the pin, insert it, and wedge that open into the right direction for the thing, and then carry on hammering, and eventually it'll go through. I should have mentioned handbrake cable. This is the handbrake cable coming out here. You need to have that installed, the cable at least in the transmission tunnel before you get going with the diff. And there's also the prop shaft. It's just, again, I don't think you can see. That's the end of the prop shaft down here. You need to make sure the prop shaft is at least in the tunnel before you get going. If you don't, the diff will be coming out again, and it'll be heartbroken. As you can see, we haven't done the rear axle yet. That's actually a job for this weekend. So at some point I'll come back and we'll have a look at the rear axle. We should also look at the handbrake. It said you should have the handbrake cable. You can see the handbrake cable is down there. That's the end of the handbrake cable, and that's on the thin bit of wire that goes around a pulley, and that pulley just hooks into the handbrake mechanism itself. However, it's best not to do all this tightening until the diff's in. The back of the diff has. Let's walk around to there. I'll show you. See if you can see in the gloom. Here's the handbrake cable coming out from the tunnel. And this is the handbrake adjuster, this little white grommet here. And nowadays it sits in a little home on the actual differential itself. But the gap that's between these two bits of metal here isn't wide enough to accept the width of the actual handbrake cable itself. So you actually have to, as long as the handbrake cable is loosely installed, you can pull it all the way back round to this side, so you can use that thin bit of wire that we saw at the front of the handbrake cable just a second ago to actually get it in there, and then you can feed it all the way back up to the front, and then you can go about connecting up everything. There's a couple of bolts. It's a fiddle, but it does eventually go. You can also see in here how the gearbox has actually come in, and it meets the prop shaft. You can see the end of the prop shaft down here. And the other end obviously attaches to the differential. You can see I've got my gear stick on as well. We actually installed the gearbox and bell housing before the engine. So we put the gearbox and bell housing together, installed it in the tunnel, and then we installed attached it to the prop shaft, and then we installed the engine afterwards. It means the engine can come down vertically. Let's go and take a look at that now. Okay, so here's the engine bay. As I was saying, we actually lowered the engine in straight downwards rather than the method they said in the manual, which was fine and dandy, apart from one bolt we found extremely difficult to get in. So you have to bolt it back into the bell housing, and there's absolutely no chance now of me being able to show you that bolt. It's on the starter motor. The starter motor sort of sits low down in there. And essentially it's an innermost bolt, so it's the one on the far side of the starter motor that's just very, very difficult to get in. In fact, we never managed it. It's going to be one thing hopefully Caterham have got a solution for. You can see that, I mean, the wires are all a mess at the moment. We've got all the cooling in and the wiring is kind of laid down. But all the cooling needs to be finalised and tidied away. But we've still got things like this random hose, which I'm really not sure exactly where it goes at the moment, so we'll have to figure that one out. You'll have lots of exciting things like that when you're building along. So we've got throttle body, ECU, we've got something called the map unit, obviously the battery. My battery was actually installed the wrong way round. It's better to have the terminals on the inside edge. Mine happen to come with the terminals on the outside edge. Really simple job to swap that. We've got the pedal box. This is the top of the pedal box, so all the movements of the pedal come from here. Clutch master cylinder, got the brake master cylinder. You can see the steering rack coming through here. We'll come and have a look at that in a second. As you can see, the cooling's a bit of a nightmare. Maybe we will go around that now actually. Normally you start the U-hose, they recommend that you put the U-hose on before you put the engine in, but we found out that's really not necessary. You can put the U-hose on whenever you like. It's one of the easier ones to apply actually, and actually it helps you putting the wiring in place if that's not in the way. Eventually you have to put it on, but probably not until you're cooling really. So U-hose, let's track from the radiator actually. It's a new radiator. It's an all aluminium radiator this year, and it means it doesn't have, the manual talks about a bleed hose coming out of here. It doesn't have that, and then the bleed hose would normally hook up to the off this on a T-piece. It doesn't exist anymore. So basically, fill a bottle top, you can track it around, goes along the top of the engine, all the way around the edge, and goes down into this little pipe down here. So that's top of the filler, goes around there. There's also one off the bottom of the filler that comes out here. So it just bends round, comes down here, and goes into what's called the T-piece, the big T-piece, the only T-piece on the new setup. So here's the actual T-piece, it's sort of buried in there. The lower half of that goes down and fits onto a hose pipe or a receptacle on the engine block. And this then tracks up through the manifold out here, goes around and down and fits on the this is called the J. Oh, sorry, this is called the J hose, and that comes and fits underneath underneath there. Okay. What else have we got? Lower water rail goes from the bottom of the. I'll show you that in a minute. It comes out the engine block. It tracks along the steering column. There's a little dive and fits on the bottom of the radiator down there. And the upper one is really simple, another easy one. Straight out and onto the water rail up there. What other fiddles did we have? That's a good point. So this is the throttle cable going into the throttle body, which hasn't got its air filter on at the moment. So it tracks around the engine. Let's go to the pedal box. So following it around. So here it goes into the pedal box. Now obviously the cover of our pedal box is back on again, or my pedal box is back on again. But in there, the cable just goes straight in and hooks to the top of the accelerator pedal. When you first fit it, it has an awful lot of slack in it, and although it feels a bit Heath Robinson, the way to fix it is to shove a block of wood behind the accelerator pedal, and then bend with a Phillips screwdriver. You shove it down the bottom of down the actual accelerator shaft, and you just bend it. You bend it towards the back of the car. Eventually, the distances, the cable gets more and more tight, and you want to make sure that you've still got some adjustment at this end, so that thread coming out the bottom. It's just wire. This sort of winds up and down. With the ultimate aim being, now when you've got your accelerator hard pressed against the accelerator stop, you've had maximum use, maximum distance on that. Okay, I haven't fully fitted the exhaust, but let's have a quick look at that now, because you have to fit the exhaust primaries, downpipes, before fitting the steering column. The steering column goes right down through them, and it's impossible to actually get them in if the steering column's in. So they're all loose fit at the moment, and later today we're actually going to be putting see they're just sticking out. Later we're going to be putting the remainder of the exhaust on. Read the manual because it tells you the order, and the order does work. You kind of have to slide the pipes in and round to get them into place, but if you follow the order in the manual, it does work. You just have to sort of be a bit calm and patient with it all. Don't forget to put the gasket back that you remove when you're taking off all these fixings. Okay, so steering column is next. I've got the quick release Boss. There's actually a bush that goes in here. And it's basically, inside that bush there's also a plastic bush, which is almost impossible to keep inside when you're putting the steering column down. Just be extremely gentle when you're putting in this top steering column. That you don't push that. Sorry, I'm going off again. That you don't push off the white boss. And there's actually one at the bottom as well. You can't see it. Caterham fit it. Sorry, get the angle right. But there's actually one that sits right up there as well, which has also got a white thing on. And again, it's very, very easy to push that out, so you just need to be extremely gentle with it. As it goes though, the lower steering column, which is this bit here, goes in first. So you insert it all the way from the dashboard in. It comes down here, so this is all, it pokes through, this is called the cheese wedge down here. And it pokes through their grommet in there. Comes out below the pedal box down here, or below the top of the pedal box, through the manifold and down into a universal joint that then goes into your steering rack. Bit of a fiddle, you're supposed to make sure everything lines up, so you don't really want too much of an angle on this universal joint if you can help it at all. So it's a nice straight line, that'll give you a nice linearity of steering response. You've got to make sure it's tight, but you've got to make sure you clear the tension in the belt. You can see there's a gap down here. It's not a big one. If you need to make that gap bigger, you have to tilt the steering rack sort of slightly back towards it, and that will lower this, but that will then take away that kind of nice straight joint you've got. So just make sure it clears the tensioner, and it's clear all your manifold. And then it's effectively, you put the top of the steering column down through, making sure you don't knock out those white bushes, and it telescopes over the lower one. So you can see the black top of the top steering column. You've got a brace that holds the two together, sandwiches the two together, and you've got the lower one. Things to keep in mind when you're fitting it. Make sure you start with your steering wheels facing forward as much as you can. When it's facing forward, then attach the universal joint so that it is in a horizontal vertical position rather than any other sort of combination or angle. Then make sure when you put the lower steering column into the universal joint down this end, that the flat part, there's a flat section here, make sure that flat section is pointing upwards. And then when you put the boss in, especially if you've got the quick release boss, there's a very slight different pattern change. You can see how it's sort of regular gaps, and then there's this one longer one. That's the one that goes on top, and that's what's centralising your steering wheel. Make sure that when the wheels are facing forward, your steering wheel is. And again, that corresponds to the cutout that's on the upper steering rack here. The clamp then sort of clamps them two together. So keep all them lined up when you're making it, and then you won't have to take it all apart again, like I did. Onto the boot cover. I'm part way through doing the boot cover, so there's still lots of things to come and have fun with. But essentially, you have to I made a small incision under here, and I pulled out the metal bracket. In the manual it says to pull it out. So I've pulled that out, say just by cutting a slit under here in the leather. You then have to punch holes through the leather. It does help if you have a tool. Here's which I picked up from my handy local store randomly. So a leather punch. It's much easier to punch holes in it with that, and it will become useful for the poppers later as well. So you punch a hole through, and then the seatbelt harnesses actually go through the leather and then into their holes. Make sure that you get the Caterham the right way up, which I didn't the first time when you were attaching the harnesses. And the lap straps, they have holes already drilled sort of next to the aperture where it's used to help, and the same down here. These aren't tight at the moment. Onto the seats and stuff probably today if all goes to plan. Same with the other side, but the 6-point harness, I believe, I haven't got the right bits for it unfortunately, but it clamps onto this That's where the leg straps go. I learnt yesterday that you have to put the hood sticks in. I haven't got them in yet, but essentially they just they sit around the edge. Even though I haven't got a roof, apparently you have to have hood sticks in. So there you go. I'll be attaching poppers later today as well. So the poppers come attached to the body, but you have to cut through. Again, that's where that punch comes in useful, and then attach the actual poppers through. And what we did find is that if you put a bit of chalk on the edge of the popper, press down the boot cover where you want it to be, it leaves a nice circular mark, which you can then use to work out where you want to put your popper, but the top of the popper, to make it all nicely line up. There you go. And that's us nearly up to date. We're just working on the lighting now, me and my dad. He did a fantastic job yesterday of putting this trim around the indicator block. It looks really neat job. Much neater than I could have done myself. So thanks for that. Like I said, the wiring, let's see if I can get under there. The wiring all has to go through the support. It's much easier to do that when it's not attached to the car. So again, perhaps think about doing that when you first attach these. It all does go through down and into the car. Somehow it's a bit of a real squeeze, and you also need to get this grommet on. So it's best to feed the grommet onto the wire before shoving it through, and then you can sort of fiddle around with it afterwards. And then the wires come out inside. And again, you need to feed a grommet up and onto. I can't really get the camera in there, unfortunately. You feed a grommet up and in. You can't see. You can see the wires coming out, but you can't see the grommet. So there's grommet in there as well, just to stop the wires chafing. So that is proof that they do go in. I promise.